Hey, it's the Heretic Chick, and I'm back. And today, I just want to talk generally about, I think I'm gonna call it the Bible's secret verses. Are you aware that there are verses in the Bible that your church doesn't want you to know about, or your pastor, or your friends? Maybe probably don't even know about them because their church doesn't talk about these verses. So we're going to talk about the secret verses that your pastor doesn't want you to know about today. And okay, so what are the secret hidden verses that your pastor doesn't want you to know about? Let's start with Matthew 16:28. This is a good one. Jesus said, "Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So Jesus said, some of you standing here won't die until you see me coming in my kingdom. And that was 2,000 years ago. Do your churches ever talk about that verse? Have you had a sermon on that verse lately? I haven't. So let's talk about Matthew 24:34. Remember, Matthew 24 is the passage that talks about the great tribulation, the abomination of desolation, the sun and the moon going dark, and stars falling from the sky, and Jesus riding in on a cloud. Matthew 24:34 says, "Truly, I say to you, this generation," 2,000 years ago, remember, "will not pass away until all these things take place." So it's the same thing in Luke 21:32, by the way. Luke, in his account, says the same thing. And so why aren't our churches talking about this? I mean, I know that I was at a church that was doing a sermon series through the book of Luke. And I think I've already shared this, but maybe some of you are new and you don't know. We had been going there and waiting for the pastor to get to Luke 21:32, which is where it says, Jesus said, all these things will take place in this generation, because we wanted to see what he would say. And when he got to that verse, keep in mind, it took 2 years to get through the book of Luke. So he spends a lot of time on each verse. But when he got to that verse, he just skipped it. Just skipped right over it. And you know what? No one even knew. I haven't encountered one person outside of my husband and I that even noticed that he did it. So I don't know. That's like a whole different topic of like how we can be mind controlled and not even realize things are happening around us. But why did he skip it? Why did he skip that verse? Was it an accident? I don't think so. I think he didn't know how to answer it. He didn't know what to say. Jesus said, all these things will take place in this generation. And here the pastor is telling us all these things will happen in our future. Something doesn't line up here. And I'm sorry, there's a fly in here buzzing around my head, but I haven't been able to catch him. So we'll just have to put up with him. So, now maybe you're asking, first of all, maybe if you're new, you're like, why does this lady call herself a heretic? I mean, what is she going to say? She's talking about these secret hidden verses in the Bible that we're not supposed to talk about. So let me just for fun, I looked up heretic meaning. It says a heretic is someone practicing religious heresy. Well, that doesn't really tell us much, does it? The similar words are dissident, dissenter, nonconformist. If you knew me, that describes me to a T. Unorthodox thinker, and let's see. Oh, a person holding an opinion at odds with what is generally accepted. So I have an opinion about what Jesus said when he said, some standing here will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I have an unorthodox opinion about what Jesus meant when he said, all these things will happen in this generation. And spoiler alert, I think he meant his generation 2,000 years ago. So I think when Jesus said, all these things will take place in this generation, I think he meant all these things will take place in this generation. And that makes me a heretic. So, keep listening, because maybe you could be a heretic too. This was so interesting. So the way we get the word heretic, okay, it comes from Latin and then from Greek. The Greek, it means able to choose. So heretic really comes from the word meaning able to choose. So, okay, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to discuss a little bit about choosing what we believe about Jesus, choosing what we think Jesus meant when he said this generation, and choosing if maybe we want to decide to be a dissenter, or if we want to just keep going along with the crowd and, avoiding these scary verses in the Bible that make us uncomfortable because we don't know how to answer them. Now, so I had this friend over the other day, a couple of days ago, and it came up that I have, I told her that I have some crazy views about this and about what Jesus meant when he said that he was coming back in this generation 2,000 years ago. And as I told her, well, the funny thing is I don't think she was aware of these verses because I quoted them to her and she kind of was looking at me like a deer in headlights. So I'm just going to assume that she wasn't aware of those verses, which is fine. I went through my whole life, Christian school, Baptist church 3 times a week, and I had never heard these verses until I was in my 30s, when I just decided to start reading my Bible for myself. That was the first time I ever read these verses. So anyway, she said, well, okay, it's not a salvation issue though, right? And my response to her was, no, it's not a salvation issue for someone who's a Christian and just decides that they don't understand what Jesus meant, and, but they'll still believe him. It's not an issue for that person. But it is a salvation issue for a lot of people, because I don't know if you're aware, but there are thousands and thousands, millions of people, especially, I know it's millions if we include the Muslims, and maybe Mormons and whoever else, but there are millions of people who believe that Jesus was a false prophet, and therefore they reject him and will not put their faith in him. So if you're going to reject Christ because of this, then I feel like we could call that a salvation issue. So I was on YouTube the other day, and YouTube suggested to me this video, and it's called Apologia, which I am not familiar with, but it came up, and they have 134,000 subscribers. So that's quite a few. I think I haven't checked recently, but I had actually last week when my husband woke up, he said, oh, babe, you have 666 subscribers. Oh, so I guess that makes me the beast. So I truly am a heretic. But then funny, 2 days later, when I looked, I had 777. So, I don't know what that means. I went from 666 to 777. That's really weird. But Anyway, this guy has 134,000 subscribers, Pelagia. And the title of his video is, Yes, Jesus was a failed prophet. So in this video, he and this other guy are critiquing Mike Winger. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mike Winger, but he does a lot of talks on different various Bible topics. And I think he just seems like a really nice guy. And, you know, I'm sure he's not listening, but if you like him, great. I like him too. I think he's really nice. But on this issue, on eschatology, he is way off, I think. And so these guys are actually critiquing Mike Winger's video on the end times, okay? And I'm going to read you some of the comments in the video. So this video, Jesus was a failed prophet, has 97,000 views. Okay, 97,000 people watched it. There's 1,700 comments. And let's just read some of them. Okay. This person, EJZ, says, so when it's convenient, a plain reading of the text is sufficient. When it's not convenient, it's time to look at proper context. This is a classic of Mike harmonization Winger. Okay. This person, Mark Rothenbuehler, said, I just hope that if I fail, like Jesus, at my life's mission, I hope millions of people don't keep reading about it 2,000 years later. What an embarrassment. This person, Rabbit Pirate, says, prophecy can be conditional, quote, prophecy can be conditional, because that's what Mike Winger said, has to be the biggest get out of jail free card I've ever heard Christians come up with. And that's because Mike Winger's saying, well, yeah, Jesus said it would happen in this generation 2,000 years ago, but because we didn't keep up our end of the bargain, it got postponed. I mean, I think that's generally what he's saying. And so he calls it prophecy is conditional. And, you know, obviously, you know, if somebody said Muhammad made a prediction, but then his followers didn't keep up their end of the bargain, and that's why it hasn't happened yet, we'd say, or he was just a false prophet, which is actually the case. So yeah, they see right through that. This person, the Shrans, says Jesus's prophecies seem about as accurate as saying the next big earthquake will happen 14 days before or after a full moon. This person, Garrett, says if the Bible were true, it would be clear and not need humans to jump through hoops to explain it. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the explanations that I'm going to call them futurists. Futurists are Christians who think that these things that Jesus said are going to happen in our future still. But if you're familiar with futurist explanations for, you know, why Jesus said these things would happen in this generation or before some standing here die, it really does feel like they jump through hoops to come up with an explanation. Let's see. This person says, I don't know how to pronounce it, Todorate says, for someone who's supposed to be a God of truth and clarity, his prophecies are very obtuse. Then this person, Degardius, said, biblical end times prophecy, every Christian apologist's favorite game of move the goalpost. It's so true though, like, you know, reading these comments, it just, I mean, these people are smart. Some of these people are really smart. And if you, actually, I encourage you to go watch the video because the one guy on it is a historian and he's actually really bright. But they see through these concoctions that futurists try to come up with to explain Jesus. Let's see if there's any more good ones. Here's one. Don't forget what Jesus said about the stars falling to the earth. Apparently, Jesus did not know that the stars were suns. So they think that we should take that literally. I'd like to point out that when Jesus said the sun and moon would be darkened and the stars would fall from the sky, that was pulled directly from the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 13, and it says the same thing there, and it's talking about the destruction of Babylon. The sun, the moon, and the stars were used as metaphors for kingdoms and their rulers and their leaders. Just think about Joseph and his dream of the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him, and the interpretation that his parents immediately came up with was, your mother and I and your brothers aren't going to bow down to you. So Jesus didn't mean that the sun and the moon were going to go dark and the stars were literally going to fall from the skies. This was language about the judgment of Jerusalem and its leaders. This person, Corringham, I think that it is pretty clear that the world is divided into two different types of people: those who recognize that the books of the Bible are a total dog's dinner of a mess, and those who insist that they are coherent, inerrant, and the received word of God. So it goes on. And a lot of these people, here, this one, for example, Mike Harrison says, when I was a Christian, I subscribed to the, quote, before the last person in that future generation has died school. So glad I no longer have to pretzel twist my mind, right? He's saying he's not a Christian anymore because he realized that these explanations were just pretzel twisting his mind. So, and then this one says, this is Ken and Cuenza said, this is an excellent discussion and needs to be shared with anyone who carries trauma over the apocalypse. Trauma because, I mean, since we were little kids and for generations past and possibly generations to come, people have been using these predictions of Jesus, this apocalypse, as telling us it's something that's going to happen in our future and holding it over our heads to inspire us with fear so that we will remain loyal to whatever camp they're trying to get us to remain loyal to. So, is this a salvation issue? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's a salvation issue for a lot of people. And you might not recognize it when you're inside your little bubble, inside your church, where everyone just accepts that Jesus was the Son of God and was a true prophet and just doesn't question these things. But part of the reason they aren't questioning them in the church is because the church isn't exposing them to these verses, okay? They aren't spending time discussing these because it's hard. But I think it needs to be done. I mean, 97,000 views on this video saying Jesus was a false prophet, and this is just one. I mean, these are all over the place. Mormons believe Jesus was a false prophet. So if you try to tell them, I think I just heard this from Mike Sullivan, that he heard a Mormon debating a Christian, and the Christian said, well, you know, Joseph Smith was a false prophet. And the Mormon retorted, well, Jesus was a false prophet. I mean, I laugh, but it's sad. So the other thing I think that's important to note is that, you know, we really need to be aware of this in regards to our children, our kids. This is a really difficult, challenging culture to raise kids in. And I have 2 kids in college right now. And I guarantee that at a public university, your kids are going to be exposed to this atheistic interpretation of these verses, that Jesus was a false prophet. And if you haven't exposed them to this, if you haven't talked about this with them, gone over it with them, And if you feel unsure in your own mind of how to justify Jesus to them, how can you know that they're going to stand strong in their faith? There's so many young adults that lose their faith as they enter into adulthood, and I think this is a big part of the reason why. I wanted to make sure that my kids were prepared to answer the atheist objections to Jesus. So, I remember talking with a pastor, and he was very frustrated talking with me. And he didn't have a good explanation for these verses. I mean, he even knew he didn't. He admitted that he just hadn't done enough research and didn't know enough. But basically, he just knew, he believed that I was wrong in my interpretation. And he said, well, I'm not going to tell you you're not allowed to talk about this at church, but you definitely shouldn't talk about it with new believers, basically. And I kind of said, well, yeah, okay, I won't do that. But the more I think about it, the people that need to have answers to this are the new believers, because their faith, it hasn't had time to grow deep roots. And so when someone comes along and tells them, oh, you're a Christian, haha, you're so ignorant, Jesus was a false prophet, don't you know that he said that he was going to come back in their generation 2,000 years ago and he didn't do it? I mean, that's going to destroy their faith. So if anyone needs to hear this more, it's the new believers, but I think we all need to hear it. So basically, what am I saying? Why am I a heretic? Okay, what about these secret verses? How does my interpretation make me a heretic? Well, I believe that when Jesus said all these things were going to happen in his generation, that they actually did. And I believe that when Jesus said that some people weren't going to die before he returned, that actually happened. So that makes me a heretic. It might make you a heretic if that's what you believe, but it doesn't bother me, because I'd rather believe in Jesus than go along with the crowd, So this video that I was telling you about, let me find the name of it one more time, by Apologia, entitled, Yes, Jesus Was a Failed Prophet. They, they called Mike Winger's explanation of this generation, because Mike Winger says, oh, well, when Jesus said this generation, he didn't really mean that generation then. He meant the generation that sees the signs. So it's in our future. And once the signs happen, then that will be the generation that Jesus was talking about. And they called that fancy footwork and unconvincing. Okay, this is what atheists think about, our best theologian's explanation for what Jesus said. They said, oh, this was interesting. So Matthew 16:28, we've already talked about it. Jesus said, some of you won't die before you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. You know what Mike Winger's explanation was for that? He said, obviously, Jesus wasn't talking about his second coming, like that thing that we think is in our future, because he didn't mention angels. And whenever he talks about his second coming, he mentions the angels coming in glory with his angels. Well, these guys from Apologia, they just had a field day with that, because in Matthew 16, verse 27, the verse immediately prior, Jesus says, the Son of Man is about to come with his angels, right? He says, I'm going to come with my angels, And some of you aren't going to die before they see it happen. But Mike Winger he didn't mention that verse, the verse that comes immediately prior to verse 28. He didn't mention that verse 27 does talk about angels. So yet again, it's like a hidden verse, it's what I'm saying. It's like, we're just gonna leave that verse out because it doesn't fit the narrative that we're trying to, get everyone to believe. So also, just this week, I saw a video by Ray Comfort. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. I really like Ray Comfort. He's this Australian guy, and he really loves the Lord, and he is really big into like evangelism, and he goes out on the beach or at college campuses, and he just witnesses to people. And I mean, it's really inspiring. So I definitely am not questioning his faith or his love. I think he just really loves people. But he had a video entitled like these are the beginning of the birth pangs. And so he's talking about earthquakes and famines and everything, and how those are the beginning of the birth pangs. And he read those verses, and he's applying it to our future. But he didn't read the next verse that says all these things will happen in this generation. They never do. They leave that verse out because it's just too difficult, It's that pesky little verse. It's like this fly, we just want to get rid of it. Wouldn't the end times eschatology narrative be so much easier if we could just cross that verse out? Then we could all just still believe that all of this stuff is in our future and that Jesus wasn't a false prophet. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to address that. I wanted to challenge you all that, first of all, if you didn't know that these verses are there in your Bible, then you need to be reading your Bible. And I say that in love because I didn't know those verses were there. I didn't read my Bible. I just started reading my Bible one day, and I was shocked at all these things that my church had hidden from me. And I say church, I mean, it's been multiple churches over my life, and the same with my husband. I mean, no one ever told us these. So we all need to get in our Bible and see what's there. And then we need to talk to our pastors about it and examine their explanations and ask ourselves, is that believable? Is that really believable? Is that going to convince an atheist? Would you be convinced if somebody gave you that explanation, except it was Muhammad's failed prophecies? Would it work with you? Yeah, it's important. It's important for you, and it's really important for your kids. And don't worry about being labeled a heretic because, I mean, wouldn't Martin Luther have been a heretic? I'm just asking. I mean, he went against what orthodoxy said, He said maybe paying these indulgences to the Pope doesn't actually gain me forgiveness of my sins, So sometimes it's a wise thing to do to question what the authority says and to examine what they're teaching, examine it with scripture and see where it leads you. And, check out some of my other videos if you're interested in an explanation that doesn't make you have to twist your brain into a pretzel. But it is going to be hard if you're coming from a futurist perspective. There might be a lot of untwisting you have to do. And have you ever sat cross-legged? My kids might call it crisscross applesauce. I used to call it Indian style, but I think we're not allowed to say Indian style anymore. But if you sit that way too long, especially when you're getting older, and then you like unpretzel cross your legs, it's like a little achy and stiff for a second, to get them straightened back out. And I think that's what happens to us when we've had our theology, our end times theology, all twisted up in this knot where we have to make this generation mean that generation, and all of these things mean some of these things. And some of you standing here won't taste death before you see the Son of Man coming in the kingdoms doesn't mean coming in his kingdom. It means something else. And, we're really twisted into a very tight knot. And sometimes coming out of that knot is going to be a little painful. Okay, but it is important that we get our theology straightened out. So that's really all I have to say to you today. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and look up those secret verses, Matthew 24:34, Matthew 16:28. Those are two big ones, but there's more. I want to show you something. My daughter brought this home from work, and now she's gone, and I have to take care of it, but it's so cute. It purrs a lot. I don't know if you can hear it. All right. See you next time.